Welcome back. In the previous step, we defined an XML context. In this step, we'll look at using a combination of XML context and annotations as well. So let's get started now. One of the first things we wanted to do was get rid of the add configuration and add component scan, which is present here. This is not a Java configuration anymore, so I don't need those annotations anymore. So I can remove them. This is an XML context. We'll be completely using XML. So right click, run as Java application, you'd see that nothing would have changed. It's completely as usual, except that I've changed to use a logger in here. That's the only change I have made. So if you look at the thing which is printed into the console, you can see the JDBC connection as well as the DAO which is printed on the left hand side. That's cool. So that's what we are printing in here using the logger.info. What I want to do in this step is try and use a combination of XML and a Java context. As of now, what are the beans that are being loaded? Let's find that out first. So from the application context, I would want to find out what are all the beans that are loaded as of now. So application context dot get bean definition names. So that's the thing which gives us the application context. What are the beans that are loaded by that specific application context? What we want to do is we would want to log that. So let's take the logger.info and logger.info. I'd want to actually print these values out. So beans loaded, what are those? Are these. One of the things that you would see when I run this, I'll run this up, Java application, and search for hyphen arrow, you'd see that the beans loaded, it's only showing the first bean which is loaded in here. The reason is because the logger.info accepts a variable argument, and when you pass an array in place of a variable argument, only the first element of the array is passed and it's replaced in here. I would want the entire array to be passed. So what I'll do is I'll convert this to an object. So I'll typecast this to an object and now run this. You'd see now that more bean definitions would come up. So I'm searching for the same thing again. Now you'd see that I'm getting 2 beans which are loaded. So in this context right now, how many beans are being loaded? 2 beans are being loaded. And which are these 2 beans? The XML JDBC connection and the XML person DAO. These are the 2 things which we defined in the application context.xml. That's cool, right? That's exactly what we expected. But now I would also want to load up all the things which we have defined in this Spring in 5 steps. So I would want to actually load up everything which is present in here, all the beans with the annotations which are present in here, the CDI ones as well as the basic stuff. How do I do that? Think about it. I would want to load these beans up. How do I do that? You can pause the video, think about it, and come back. Okay, the answer to that is we need to define a component scan. We need to define a component scan to scan these packages. So when Spring does a component scan on this package, whether you're using a XML definition or a Java definition, it does not really matter. All that we need to do is get a component scan triggered over here. The context which we are using is an XML context. So in the XML context, we would want to define a component scan. How do we do that? In the Java context, we looked at it earlier, right? We used add component scan to define the component scan. How do we do it in the Java context? We need to use something called context component scan. One of the things is the context is not yet available in here. So let's first define the context schema. So only the bean schema is present in here. We need to define the context schema also in here. Be a little careful in here and observe exactly what's happening in here. So what we are defining now is a new schema. So what I would do is, this is context, and for this I would want to define a new shortcut name. So that's context. So we have a shortcut name called context. By default, whenever you use anything without a namespace, it belongs to this namespace. Now for context, I'm defining a namespace saying the context, and also I have to define the schema location for the context. So let's go ahead and do that. So for context, instead of beans, I have to replace context. context, context. Make sure that you are replacing the context in place of beans here, in place of beans here, and here. So 3 places you need to replace with context. And once you replace that, I can go ahead and now use the context namespace. You can see that one of the things which is being offered right now is context component scan. I'll use that. All that I needed to do was press control space, context component scan. Now I need to give it which package to use. This is XML, so I'll just define the closing node in here. Now base package, what is the package we would want to scan? We can either scan the basics package, then we would load everything. Let's do that. Right click, copy qualified name, and I would paste it in here. All that we are doing is in the XML context, we are defining a component scan. Let's run this program right now. Spring XML context application. Let's see what beans are loaded. Control F. Beans loaded. You can see that now a huge list of beans are being loaded. Let's copy it down here and see what's present in there. So what's present in here is JDBC connection, component JDBC connection, the basic application, the CDI application. You can see that all the component scan application, all of them are also loaded because they are all defined as a configuration. You can see that the XML JDBC connections are loaded, the binary search stuff is loaded, the CDI stuff is loaded, and the JDBC connections, and everything else is being loaded up. So if you want to go further, you can actually try and retrieve the other beans and print the content from them also. This is how we define an application context with the beans loaded through component scan. So here we are actually using a combination. We have, for some of the beans, we are defining and auto-wiring them. For the other beans, we are using a component scan to load them up. One of the exercises I would suggest for you to do is to remove this. So try and remove this, add the annotations on top of the XML JDBC connection, XML%DAO, then you would see that everything would work as usual. So try and play around with these application contexts, both the XML and the Java configurations. It's very important that you understand both the XML configurations and the Java configuration and what you can do through each one of them. In this course, from here on, we would be focusing on using a Java context because with Spring Boot, we see that everybody is switching towards Java context. I see very little need for us to define context in XML, but it's always good for you to understand what has happened earlier because there are always earlier applications that you would want to maintain. Until the next step, bye-bye.